Isaiah, thank you for that. We'll talk more social media coming up later on in the show. Right now, speaking of recruitment, we're going to talk to Max Farrell from Workhound. And today, it's all about making that first impression. Max, thank you for joining us today. They say you never get a second chance at making a first impression. And when it comes to recruiting and sometimes even retaining, that first impression is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, it certainly is. Thank you guys for having me. And it's something we've been thinking about a lot lately because companies are trying to figure out where can we get that percentage point improvement. And often they may think it's in the branding or something like that, but oftentimes it comes down to what is that first experience that we give someone and how are we going to be remembered for that? And so that can not only be for somebody that's considering joining your company, what is their first impression of them, but also when they join that team, really thinking about what is that first touch point like. And to your point, Kaylee, if you don't take care of somebody early on, you may not get that second chance, and they may not warn you.
And Max, can you talk to that initial first impression? I think that sometimes gets overlooked, and that's really happening at the recruitment process when someone might get back to you very delayed with a potential first interview or something like that, or maybe the communication is just not very transparent.
Yeah, a first impression, yeah, you can break it out a couple different ways. It's what is the initial viewpoint? Because you think about somebody potentially joining an employer, they're going to do research on Glassdoor, Facebook, Google reviews, talk to their network before they ever consider applying or reaching out to connect to the company. So that's one of the very first impressions where you don't even get a person to have an opportunity to connect. And then when you actually have somebody connect with a recruiter, it really comes down to thinking about, is the recruiter just saying, okay, what kind of job do you want, and just going through the motions? Or is the recruiter really saying, hey, tell me what's the best fit for you? What are you really looking for to make sure that there is that alignment? And then once somebody's made that commitment to join the team, it's really doing everything you can to say, how do we make sure that this person is really feeling like a valued team member here instead of just a number or an employee? And so it's really important to think through the minute details of the experience instead of just saying, oh, well, this is our process, we're just going to run through the motions.
So Max, when we're talking specifically about drivers and driver recruitment, a lot of companies and fleets' best recruiters are the ones who are the drivers themselves. They're out on the roads and they're sitting there talking with their competing drivers or maybe their owner ops who are looking to jump into a fleet system. And that can be your first impression too. And for companies, it's really vital to make sure that the people on the front lines are giving a good impression of your company, because they're doing that often without the overlook of management and without people looking at them saying, what are you telling people, you know? So when you're looking at this from a driver perspective, how can, as a fleet, as a company, you make sure that your drivers are, one, having the best experience, and two, using that as a handshake and as a marketing tool and as that good first impression for these other potential drivers?
It's a really great point. You know, the best recruiters out there are happy drivers. So that's spot on. And I think one of the things companies can be looking at is what percentage of our applicants or even hires are coming from referrals. And if that, I can't remember what the industry average is, but if you're below industry average as far as what the referral percentage is, then we want to have an honest conversation, because that is not only a measure of how many people we're getting in the door, but it's also a measure of trust and perceived value of the company. Because if people aren't referring folks to join, then clearly they have their own issues because they're not wanting to use their own social currency to say, hey, this is the company of choice. So I think it's a really fascinating metric for companies to look at to see, are we building enough goodwill with our people? Because if we're not, then there's other areas in the business we need to course correct so that we can even get the opportunity to refer. And yeah, exactly to your point, Kaylee, that is one heck of a first impression where people are organically advocating for the company without the company's full-time recruiters doing anything on their part.
And Max, one of the things I think that you mentioned that's absolutely brilliant, of course, is Glassdoor and other types of review sites. Any words of advice or insight on really being able to see through some of them? For instance, I think back to a prestigious firm that I was interested in years ago that had stellar online reviews at Glassdoor. Then years later, I talked to someone that's internal there, and I found out that a lot of the requirements for employees were to leave a stellar review on Glassdoor. And on the other side of the spectrum, I've heard of, a disgruntled worker really coordinating multiple emails to just talk down a company after ending on a bad note. So are there any words of wisdom or insights on really being able to see through some of that so someone can really get to have that honest first impression?
Well, our goal anytime we're making a decision like that is to gather data points. If we're getting perspective from one person, that's an opinion, that's a data point. It's not fact, and it's the same with Glassdoor. And certainly that what you shared is definitely a reality out there where frustrated people will share negative reviews, and then there are people that are either nudged strongly or gently from the company to share something positive, and it skews the real perception. But that's one of the unfortunate things about review sites is that you usually get this wide spectrum. You get the folks that are super frustrated, or the people that are super ecstatic, and often you want the baseline. Who are the people in the middle that are just going about their day to get that real experience? And sometimes the only way to do that is to talk to the folks that are in there. I think one of the things that's been really interesting about seeing sites like Glassdoor and that sort of thing is that companies that are using feedback mechanisms have actually seen a reduction in some of the feedback going to Facebook pages or Glassdoor, because these people are actually figuring out, oh, I can send a message where the leadership's going to see this versus it just going into the void. Yeah, I'm going to share it here. So that's been really interesting to see when I've talked to some of the carriers out there that are seeing a drop in mentions on social sites. And it started with saying, hey, we've got a committed place to share feedback. So fascinating to see.
I love that. Having that directed place for feedback to land and directing people there to get that feedback is better than just kind of leaving them out in the ether, because then you stumble upon some things that maybe aren't true or maybe have been fudged up or down depending on a person's individual experience. And Max, before we let you go, you guys have created this content ebook about kind of the first impression. Can you tell us a little bit about that and where people can go to find it?
Absolutely. Again, we've been hearing from a number of the companies that we work with and others out in the industry. They're trying to figure out how to get better, how to become a better version of themselves. And so we put together an ebook that's got a few tips and a few questions you can ask yourself and your company to figure out how do we audit to really make sure that we are the company of choice and that we're doing everything we can to hold on to people early on. Because as we know, turnover is highest in the first 6 months. So if we can do our part to take care of people early on, we'll keep them for the long haul.
Max, always a pleasure having you on here in FreightWaves Now. If you want to reach out, how can they find you?
Well, you guys are down the road, so just come by and say hi. But for everyone else that's not in Chattanooga, please check us out. It's workhound.com. We'd always love to have a conversation with your team. And if we can't be helpful from a product standpoint, please check out our content. We have a lot of great resources out there around the workforce engagement experience, retention, recruiting, all that fun stuff. So I think there's multiple ways we can be helpful.
Awesome, Max. Thank you again for joining us. Right now, we're going to take a quick break, and then we will be back with some exciting news about some freight broker classes being offered right here in the Chattanooga area. A great partnership between one logistics company and Chattanooga State Community College. We'll be right back.